Kelpies are one of the water horse sort of family. There are some water horses that are lake related and some are river related. Kelpies are usually river people, and they're notoriously unpredictable. They sometimes, as obviously happened a lot in days gone by. You might be lying around on a riverbank and you meet this beautiful shiny black horse and you just can't resist jumping on its back, and then you're promptly dragged into a river and drowned. I don't meet Kelpies like that. I meet Kelpies as a presence that is about the power and the story of running water. And yes, if they manifest usually as a black horse. But the darkness there is the darkness of a deep pool.
Welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. Today we welcome Gordon MacLellan to the Spirit Box to discuss his book Sacred Animals. He is a writer, storyteller, animist, pagan, and environmentalist, who has recognised that to really involve people with a renewed interest in and a commitment to the world around us, we may need more than traditional stories or religious parables and moral fables. The stories that grow from direct experience are powerful ways of building connections, building a sense of belonging. And when we pare away the greenwashing, the jargon, the endless blurbs, a lot of environmental urgency and anxiety just now can come down to connection, to renewing or refreshing that sense of really being part of the world. This connection forms a deeper purpose, one of rewilding the soul. Gordon's book is not always about animals you see or touch or run away from, but animals to see with the eyes of your mind, to encounter in the other ways, animals to wonder over in the other world and in this, the physical world. And the heart of this book is a spiritual adventure into contact and friendship with the animal world. It draws on ancient knowledge, surviving traditions, memories of other customs, and a simple imagination that helps bridge the gap between this world and the other. We go through Gordon's approach, his use of cycles and stages in how he attains this connection, and he takes us through how stories and place interact, giving us an example of the stories of water and Kelpies from his native Scotland. And he talks to us about trolls and landscape and being enthralled by the landscape. And we discuss the dark waters that some of us go to, a topic that we've discussed many times on the show. In the Plus show, we get into discussing rewilding the soul. We discuss the human-nature divide, and Gordon treats us to one of his stories on the Kelpies, which is truly, truly wonderful. I deeply, deeply enjoyed it. Now, if you want to hear the Plus show, it's very simple to do so. Simply join the Patreon and get the entire Plus show back catalogue, all of the Spirit Garden work we do, and a heap of bonus show extras, lectures on the Jinn, amongst many other topics. If you're watching this on YouTube or any other video platform, then remember to subscribe. Okay, let's get on with the show. Gordon MacLellan, you are very, very welcome to the Spirit Box. Nice to have you on the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Fantastic. So just to kind of help orientate people, can you give the listeners an overview of you and your work?
Yeah. So hello, everyone. I'm Gordon. I'm Gordon MacLellan, and I work in my day-to-day work. I'm an artist and a storyteller, better known as Creeping Toad. So most of my everyday work is, well, as I see it, it's about helping people find ways of exploring their emotional and personal connections with nature, with the world around them, usually through creativity, through art and stories and celebrations and things like that. So that's my sort of everyday work. Um, in sort of in terms of personal spirituality, I'm an animist pagan, and I've been one since I was about 10 years old. So it's a long running part of who I am and what I do. Right.
And then we're going to talk about your work today, Sacred Animals, and some of your storytelling work. But I love that you've kind of offered us that tidbit straight away that you've been an animist since you were 10. Can you give us a bit of the background to that?
Um, I almost there's very little that I would never answer, and it's more sometimes I don't quite know what to say. Um, when I was about 10, I guess I was experiencing the world in ways that didn't make sense to my sensible Church of Scotland, Central Scotland upbringing. And I'd read, sort of C.S. Lewis and the Narnia books, and I'd read The Hobbit and things like that, which were wonderful and inspiring, but detached. And then I read Alan Garner, and in his books, his stories, magic is anchored in our world here and now. And for me, that just instantly gave me the language I needed it gave me the language I needed to start exploring the world in ways that made sense to me. So, and that's been me ever since.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think for a lot of people, things start fairly early,
Yeah.
in this kind of area. Excuse me. I love that. I like that kind of resolute. No, this is how this makes sense. This view of the world. I think that's fantastic. And you had another tip there: creeping toad, rather.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Again, that's another of those questions that's quite hard to answer because I've been.
Hopefully, this will get easier.
No, probably not. I've been connected to amphibians all my life. I mean, my mum used to say with a heavy sigh that where my brother and sister brought friends home from school, I brought tadpoles in jam jars. And one of my earliest memories is I must have been 3 or maybe 4, and must have pestered my poor mother so much that she eventually relented and took me to visit a pond. And it's definitely an infant's memory of a long walk through a big wood and across a huge field, and we climbed over an enormous gate. And then I was evidently arriving in heaven, and I was standing in a pond in my little wellies. So I've been connected to amphibians all my life. And as soon as that sort of, for want of a better word, maybe magical consciousness started unfolding, Toad was there. And I've been told totemed or told linked ever since. So,
right.
So when I set the business up in 1985, it had to have Toad in the title.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, toads are very magical creatures.
Yeah.
A huge bit of Cornish witchcraft centers around toads, so I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be familiar with. So, Sacred Animals, you're re-releasing, is that correct?
Yes, we did. An the original edition came out with the publishers Capelban in 1997, I think it was, and Capelban have closed up shop since. But I decided I wanted to rework it, and I felt the ideas were still relevant and current, and I wanted to sort of revisit it and then produce a new edition and go for it from there. So that's what I did.
Okay. So can you tell us a bit about the book?
This is the point when I realised I should have one next to me, and I should sort of now hold it up and go, everybody, this is the book. This, you can visualise it. It sort of fits in that space. Um, Essentially, it's a book about doing things for yourself. So it's a bit sort of, yes, I'm going to write a book to tell you how not to do things the way books tell you to. Um, for me, that personal creativity that I explore in my everyday work is really important in a spiritual world as well. That and for me, what I set out to do in Sacred Animals was to offer people ideas and principles and activities to help them build their own relationships with the world around them. Uh, so it isn't prescriptive.
Mm.
It's almost entirely endlessly saying you could try this or just reinvent the idea and do it your own way.
Mm.
Um, but for me, that's actually really important that we as individuals find our own creative and spiritual relationships with the world around us. And if that means that you need to walk away from or look away from the traditions you've been taught in or you've been working in as a magical person, I think you need to do it. You need to sort of not necessarily accept everything that you're always told and just find the language that helps you relate to the world around you. And that's what Sacred Animals tries to do. It's to give you some tools to do that.
Love it. And I see you kind of, you look at it, you divide it into like 3 cycles of activity,
Hmm.
then very slyly add a fourth.
Yes.
Um, in because I really think what you've built out here is so workable, kind of from my own like from my own practice in terms of it's more building up a connection with the spirit of place.
Yes.
And I see so much of it and go, oh, yeah, that would work for that. That would work. I can
Yes.
see
Yeah.
that, it makes an awful lot of sense. And I think, particularly for the patrons of the show, will get a lot of value in it, because I think it actually aligns with so much of the stuff that I've been talking about. But equally, my caveat is, well, it worked for me. It might not work for you. Figure it out
Yes.
yourself. So I really relate to that position. I think it's really important to give people that space to play, to be creative, but also really get a personal relationship rather than kind of replicate something else.
Yes. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, and I agree, or I resonate very strongly with that sense of place as a wider thing than connecting just in inverted commas to animals. And that was quite a conscious decision on my part to go for an animal link, partly because I think for for a book like this to have a wider resonance, it's quite good to help people focus, to give them something quite definite to look for or look at. And I think a lot of people respond to animals far more strongly, or they feel they do, or they feel they respond far more strongly to animals than to plants, say, or to landscapes, and that they could understand the sense of making a connection to a mouse or a pigeon or a bumblebee more easily than they might to a tree or a landscape. Or while we now end up in this whole set of contradictions. I'm a zoologist by my formal training, so I'm a zoologist and I specialised in terrestrial ecology. So I look at animals and I look at animals in relation to their connection. But for me as an individual, I go for trees. It's almost trees and rocks are almost always my anchor points in any landscape, or trees and rocks. And given that I'm a pond person, any open body of water that I can sit next to. So I really sort of relate to your comments about landscape. That for me, my starting point is always just to stop and feel the place around me, rather than focusing in on the rabbit that's just run across my path.
Yeah, I like that. And I think it will really resonate with a lot of people, because like a lot of the challenge I think people have as moderns is doing exactly what you've described, stopping, and stopping and being in a place, or with another being, and actually taking it in rather than immediately jumping to to a thought or an action, um, or othering, you know, um,
Yeah,
you know, um, in in terms of the the cycles. So I think the cycles are a really good framing. Could you take us through those? Yeah.
I think partly I use that idea of cycles because I am an artist and I think visually as much as anything, and I like the sense of movement that is contained within the thought of a spiral, more than say hierarchies or levels or layers, and also the fact that circular movements, like the ripples in a pond, interact with each other and overlap each other. So when I was planning Sacred Animal, rather than saying you must do this and you must do this and then you're allowed to do the next thing, um, I like that sense of cycles or movement where you suddenly find that one has fed into another and then perhaps ripples back or eddies back into the first one. So, what I was suggesting is that is, I, for me, feels fairly straightforward and logical. Might not be for other people. Um, but we start with identification, just finding ways of getting to know things and to look at things. I mean, you mentioned the challenge that's built into just stopping and being aware and listening. And for me, that is actually at the root of so much of what we need to do for ourselves as people living in this world is is to recognize the world around us. So for me, the first cycle in Sacred Animals, a lot of it is just about stopping. Just it is. It's almost you can hear a teacher very firmly at the front of a class saying, "Will you all sit down and be quiet and just listen for once?" Yeah, and it is that. It's just stop. And so, while it's very easy to say that, "Oh, just go and stop, darlings," sit under a bush. That's not always straightforward. Um, so it's I was trying to offer activities to do, ways of trying to relax, ways of trying to find your own stillness, find your own meditative processes. Um, and at the same time, just encouraging people just to stop. Just don't do very much, just go and look, have a walk, have a wander, just switch your phone off is always a good start.
Mm.
Um, and just enjoy the world around you. And within that, offering some activities, like perhaps very quick poems, or just even just sort of what's the word, stream of consciousness writing, anything that starts letting people explore feelings without it being therapy, without having to sit down and unburden yourself of everything to the nearest sort of lump of rock or passing toad, but just to stop and to use whatever emerges as the first steps of creativity in that sense of building relationships. Um, and this is where, for me, it all starts getting intriguing because I approach things as both a scientist and a pagan. And I have absolutely no problem with the thought that the spirit of some animal will wander in and look at me and then wander off again. And I work a lot with environmentalists who are often quite determinedly atheist. Sort of, no, 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 you can't have anything else, nothing else, but nothing else can ever possibly be true. And you think, well, just try living a bit. And so there often feels like a bit of a dichotomy for me in the activities I'm writing or describing. Because for me as a pagan, they will take me into magical places and into spiritual places. And at the same time, I recognize and hope that for other people, they will offer creative avenues that are rewarding just because they're about creativity. They're about people just not analyzing, not thinking, not arguing, and just feeling and finding ways of expressing and recognizing feelings, which is a very long winded way of saying the first cycle in Sacred Animals is about identification, is about taking time to look and also then be noticed
Mm.
and to be still. And if we're just doing, if you like, physical experience rather than spiritual experience, um, being noticed is when you start relaxing more in the world around you, when you can just sit and just not worry and being still, finding that stillness uh, can be when. So I suddenly I think I'm about to sound like an advert. Um, and finding that stillness, darlings, is when something wonderful may happen. I mean, and realistically, it is because if you can find those opportunities or moments within yourself when you just stop, when you just relax, when you do just stop worrying about being you and being noticed and whatever, um, that's when the animal world sort of reveals itself more. And if you talk to people who do things like badger watching and a lot of that's a practice of patience and watching. And for us, it's just the same. You just learn to stop and notice and be noticed and also then not be noticed. One of the nicest things is to sit by a log pile, um, and it's a good test perhaps for yourself is to sit by a log pile or a pile of brash in the undergrowth somewhere and see what emerges. I mean, I've had some wonderful moments just watching a weasel just come out of a pile of old logs in a wood and just run around. And it wouldn't have done that if it had known I was there. Um, and as it was, it just foraged around. I think I was quite relieved it didn't actually kill anything in front of me, but but you learn to stop. So the first cycle in Sacred Animals is called identification, and the heart of it is learning to be still, which you never quite perfect. I think you go on practicing refining forever, but that stillness is really important, and stillness both within ourselves and within our relationship with the world. If nothing else rewards you, that will. So we go from that sense of identification, of looking at the world around us, to connection, to really reaching out. And so our second cycle is connection. It's how do we reach out and touch that world? And this is where we really start moving into more determinedly magical areas, or at least from an outside point of view. That's what people see. And we start talking about building connections with within Sacred Animals. It's building connection with animal spirits through making things, perhaps by again, I'm an artist. I like making things, so I'm making masks and I make costumes, and I have a great time just getting completely covered in mess. Um, and for me, those become physical embodiments of a relationship with an animal. Um, Often, the process of making is as important as the final piece. Within the process, it gives you time, or gives me time, to think and dwell upon the characters of that animal that I'm trying to build into, let's say, a mask or a costume. Um, Equally, you might just collect things. Again, I tend to live, I'm just looking at now looking at the tables behind me and wondering what's there. It's mostly things that we're making at the moment. I collect things. Lots of people do. We'll have shells, we'll have feathers, we'll have stones, we'll have pine cones. All of those things can be connections in their own right as well. And we build fetishes. We build those little power objects where all the essence of an idea um, is bound into a single object. And if a reader of a book like Sacred Animals isn't into making masks and dancing around in the woods covered in face paint, making fetishes is a really nice way of concentrating mind and experience into a single object, into something small, usually something small that can be held and carried, and that the possession of and the making of becomes part of the process of connecting really strongly to a particular species. So our second cycle is connection. And after that, we start going into much more active work. And our third cycle is about action and about and about where do we put our power? Yeah, I'm. It's very easy if you sort of operate within the magical worlds to get very caught up in ceremony and in deciding, oh, we're going to do this great ritual and save the world again and again and again. But for me, magic is about what? Well, right. Let's start that line again and say, for some of us, magic may be about changing the world. Um, for me, magic is far more about helping the world find its own way of changing. Uh, um, it's becoming an active, conscious part of the whole web of the world around us, and I think that is important, that we become agents so that the world may work through us. And for me, that second cycle of connection feeding into a third cycle of action and communication, um, you end up being asked to do things. And that might be creating some fantastic ceremony and gathering 500 witches to dance on a hilltop. But just as you are just as likely to be asked to, well, in my case, to clean out a pond because it's so silted up or it's so sort of clogged up with rubbish that the life of the pond is being stifled. And rather than doing some great, wonderful ceremony, it's much more useful to just wade in and do something physical. So for me, that final cycle is really about finding magical action and recognizing the magic of everyday actions, and that our actions need to come from those places of magical power and integrity, and that makes every action a magical act, and every action becomes a ceremony in its own right. And I'm rambling off on an aside here, so I'm going to let Dara come back in and shout at me and give me another question.
Well, I think that was really wonderfully put, and and really resonates. Like what I work on with the patrons is around building connection with place, as I said. Really part of that is stewardship. So you're actually showing the space, showing the plant life in the area, the animal life in the area. You're demonstrating to them that you're an ally, through acts exactly as you described. So yes, I was nodding along. I turn off my microphone because I have a terrible habit of just going, yeah, Yeah. But yeah, no, that really struck a chord with me. Um, and I really agree with the simplicity, of that, of the actions. For me, it takes time to build that connection. Like the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom are quite rightly very suspect of us. You know,
Mm,
so I don't know if does that kind of resonate with you.
yes, yeah, I think it. Yes, absolutely. It takes time. Animals do need to get, well, anything needs to get need need. Sorry, I'm falling over my words this evening. Um, yeah, the animal worlds and the other worlds generally take time to get to know us, and we need to accept that. And I think that patience is really important, uh, and that it's very easy to expect too much and to think, right, I've done this. I'm now sitting down on a park bench and I'm meditating deeply. You know, bring on the dancing bears, and it's not going to happen, and it's not going to happen like that. Or if it does, then be very suspicious because it probably means something far nastier is at play. Um, I think we need to recognize our relationships have been compromised in many ways, and they need to be rebuilt. But that just giving ourselves time to stop and be still is rewarding in itself, and it's rewarding for us, and it's good for us as individual people to find that stillness and that sense of peace and connection to the world around us. And yes, it then takes time for us to be trusted. And I mean, a lot of people talk about building relationships, particularly with birds in their garden, the birds that they go and feed every day or whatever. And that's almost a representation of a wider process because within those you see the time it takes for a robin to trust someone enough to fly down onto their hand to pick up a mealworm, or for hedgehogs to not panic when your patio light comes on as they trundle across, um, and when they realize that the food you're putting out is for them and it's good. Um, yeah, we need to have patience, and it takes time, and that simple things are really important, and that you don't need big dramatic anythings a lot of the time. Um, we just need we need to be ordinary and just remember we are just part of it all. We're not the most important part. Again, I think people want to do the big thing. They want to do the big dramatic helpful act, but often the little ones are just as important. And the ordinary is used as a dismissive word a lot of the time, but the ordinary things are as valuable as anything else.
Yeah, I think there's true wisdom in that. I really, really do. Um, and it makes so much sense. And you mentioned earlier as well, when we're talking about the first cycle of identification of building a connection, and you mentioned switching off your phone um, as part of that. Um, Now, I fully agree with that. I'm I'm always having a go at social media as being. I mean, it's old news. It drains people's intention. You know, it can be really, it can really absorb people's time, and not for very much return. You know, um, again, not news, and certainly anyone who listens to this podcast, we're like, yeah, okay, Darren, we get it. You don't like Facebook.
Yeah.
You know, we've established that. But I certainly, if like most people in the modern world, I have my own kind of phone addiction. Um, Even just from like listening to shows, not necessarily constantly engaging with it. Um, but you mentioned that specifically. Can you pull that thread for me a little bit and talk to a why and then what does it mean to you?
I suspect that what I say will your um have your audience going, oh no, Dara's just feeding him the lines. Because I suspect what I will say will probably be exactly the sort of thing that you said. That it is, as soon as we've got a phone, and as soon as our phone is switched on, even if we don't think we're paying attention to it, it's a presence in the background that you're always waiting for. And it's almost just like it's like the anchor that's holding us to um a technological world, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just, but if you're trying to reach out to and touch a green and growing world, just take sort of set yourself free. It's like drop the anchor, and 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 it's, for me, switching off your phone is about letting yourself go, and there aren't any interruptions. And no matter what you've done to try and stop other people calling you for that time or anything else, it's a presence that's there, and you're almost bound to check your phone at some point, or suddenly think, oh, I'll just take a picture of that, I'll take a photo, I'll post it on Instagram later. And you think, don't bother, just for once, just do something that's really just about you and your relationship with a world that doesn't give a damn about mobile phones or other technologies.
Yes, I wholeheartedly approve. I agree completely. And when I say that, I'm not saying it's easy. It's really hard. It's really hard. You know, but I think it's like, as you describe those cycles. I think having one's phone on or being kind of immersed in it is just a massive obstruction to that being in a place, stillness, just listening. I think it's a massive barrier to that. But now we'll move on, and I can stop slacking off phones. Um, yeah, proper grumpy middle aged man. Uh, but I love that whole concept though. You're talking about kind of like the the small actions can have such meaning, such impact. Um, like I said, it has that stewardship in it. Um, but I think it's also kind of a dualistic piece to it as well. Is that like in the small action within it is actually something quite big and significant. To your point of like clearing a pond rather than having a ritual with 500 people. It's like that clearing a pond or clearing a stream, lets that water flow properly. It lets all the life in that
Mm.
area benefit from the water flowing, or the removal of rubbish and what have you. And those things are actually massive to place, huge to place.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
and in and when that's reciprocated, something magical genuinely can happen. Um, and on that point, how has kind of the wild world or the green world reciprocated to you?
Yeah, just a minute. I'm just gonna. Sorry, everyone. Just got a close up of the face there. I just decided. I keep thinking of things as you're speaking, and then as soon as I start speaking, I forget them. So I'm just arming myself, not with a phone, but with a pen and a pencil to keep my notes going, to remind me to speak. Before I answer about how things resonate, how things have reached out to me. I'm going to go back to the point you were making about small things have big uh, impacts. That one is you're absolutely right, and two is it's almost again think ecologically, and that those lines and the lines that we hear so often as pagans is that everything is connected and we are all related. Um, so that the small action you make reverberates around an ecosystem, around a landscape, so that, and as you said, the water example is a really good one, because if you clean or help a body of water clean itself, then that changes how it relates to the whole environment around it. It makes the pool or the stream a more active, vibrant place for animals to come and drink, or water that isn't polluted for plants to draw upon. It becomes richer, it fills with life, it becomes more dynamic. And I'm wondering, we could put the links in at the end. I do a lot of work with the local museum, and during lockdown, I was commissioned to write a series of poems and make the poems into films. And there's one just called Pond Ripples that is exactly that. It's about the thought the first time you dig a pond, assuming you're going to dig lots of them, of course, but when you dig a pond, it's that sense of a whole world suddenly or slowly unfolds in this hollow you've made, and that your one morning or your day of hard, muddy work opens up a whole world to everyone else. And when you start doing that, yes, it has huge sort of ripple effects for the, if you like, the obvious ecology around you. It has great impact on you as a person, and those new buzzwords of personal well-being and things like that. And that isn't me being cynical, I just get a bit annoyed about buzzwords, but it does that. It's really important for us, and our sense of worth when we help everything else. And magically or spiritually, it it means you are saying to the world around you, I am here to help. The difficult thing is actually working out what help is needed at times. We're very good at deciding that we know what the answer should be. Yeah. Oh, this is what you should do. We must do this. We must do that. That's the right thing to do. And you think it's perhaps better just to wait and listen and feel what these animals or this place needs or is looking for. And then you'd asked about how or what those sort of connections have been for me, and that's, in some ways, that's another of those quite hard to answer questions. On an immediate level, particularly working around ponds, it often feels like we're doing first aid at the moment. That cleaning a pond, let's stick with that as an example, or making a new pond, both really important actions, both really important for that habitat. But the wider issues affecting the amphibians that I relate to particularly are so great that action within a pond, say, is first aid. It's putting on a sticking plaster and hoping it helps. Whereas wider issues about the prevalence of chemicals that are now just pervading everything, and climate change, uh, are much bigger than are addressed by just digging a pond. That's one thing. On the other, or on another thing, um, doing that work or that sort of work for me connects me to water and to running water and to the dark stillness of a pond, and finding my stillness beside those stillnesses are where I meet those others. I meet the spirits of place, and and if anyone hasn't worked out from my accent, I'm Scottish, and so for one of the big spirits of place out of my childhood and storytelling background are Kelpies. And Kelpies, for those who don't know, Kelpies are one of the water horse sort of family. There are some water horses that are lake related and some are river related. Kelpies are usually river people, and they're notoriously unpredictable. They sometimes, as obviously happened a lot in days gone by. You might be lying around on a riverbank and you meet this beautiful shiny black horse and you just can't resist jumping on its back, and then you're promptly dragged into a river and drowned. I don't meet Kelpies like that. I meet Kelpies as a presence that is about the power and the story of running water. And yes, if they manifest usually as a black horse. But the darkness there is the darkness of a deep pool. And for me, Kelpie is one of the people I work with a lot, and there's just that stunning sort of presence that is rewards not the right word, but it's perhaps the best word I've got for the richness that comes out of that. That sort of I would work for ponds and for rivers, whatever else I've felt. I hope I would. If I didn't have that pagan background, I'd still do it because I'm an ecologist. But spiritually, to do all that and then to find on the other side of the river that Kelpie's sitting watching you and approving of what I'm doing is a reward, and it's a richness, and it opens up new avenues of communication and hopefully a sense of trust. And again, I mentioned that we'll put links to the museum poems in the notes with this. But there's another one that's about trolls, because I work a lot with trolls. And earlier on in our chat, we were talking about landscapes, and for me, landscapes resolve into trolls and into people made of moss and stone. But I read a beautiful discussion, and I don't know if the etymology actually holds up, but the idea is brilliant. That says that when you actually read early Scandinavian myths, where we first meet trolls, it's very clear that the Jotuns or the Ettins, the giants and the Aesir and the Vanir are all different sorts of beings, but they're all quite capable of intermarriage. So to be a giant isn't necessarily to be enormous, it's just to be a giant. But across all of these, it looks like to be a troll isn't a fourth sort of being. To be a troll was a particular state of being, and that almost anyone could become enthralled, to become enchanted. And so there was a suggestion that yeah, that to be a troll is not to be a particular sort of being, but to be in a state of enchantment. And that then feeds into the same word enthrall. The argument is that it comes from the same root, and that sense of being enthralled is to be enthralled. And so for me, that's part of the process of getting to know a landscape, is you become enthralled by it. You become enthralled. You become one of the trolls. And so I wrote a whole piece about becoming your own troll, about just stopping and listening and letting a landscape fill you like a glass vessel, just pour itself into you until you are leaves and stone and wind and water. And that's when you become your own troll. That's one thing. The other thing is I just like trolls, and I do like meeting big lumpy stone people with eyes like water and hair like moss. And for me, one of the biggest excitements of the landscape is when I'm sitting in it and I feel it enthralling itself around me, and you think, oh, yes. So for me, magic's always about contradictions. So you can become your own troll, but at the same time, you can look out there and sometimes meet those big traditional trolls who aren't nearly as unpleasant as Tolkien wrote them.
Lovely, lovely. That's really nice. I like that. When you were discussing the kelpies, the warhorse, there was a phrase you mentioned that kind of resonated a bit with me when you talked about kind of like the darkness of the deep water.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it resonated with me is part of kind of part of my own practice involves a kind of an underworld dark pool that sometimes I go to, and I've heard it mentioned before from people I don't know, similar experience, similar place, and I kind of wanted to ask you, what does that dark water mean to you?
Um, I, I'm then hearing you talk about dark pools, and I wonder if we all do this. Yeah, for me, very early in my own practice, well, given who I am, pools and ponds are almost always going to be important, but the sense of almost the bottomless pool that um, that absorbs you, that I'm sure psychologists would just go to town completely on sort of rebirth issues or something. But for me, it's there is a very deep dark pool that calls me and summons me and takes me sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and that is never a case for fear. It's never. It's not. It's darkness in the sense that you need this darkness and you need the stillness that the deep water brings. This isn't darkness that's about fear. Um, it's one of those challenges to the to worlds that polarize and have dark and light and
Mm-hmm.
bad and up and down and all that stuff. That the darkness of a kelpie's pool is about the deepest levels of stillness, where again a lot of my practice is shamanic, and in those pools that's where you dissolve, and everything goes apart from your sense of self and that sense of I am me and nothing else matters. Skin, flesh, bones, and blood have all gone, but
Mm-hmm.
you're still a conscious spark in the depths of a kelpie's pool, and then you come back from there.
Mm-hmm.
You come back. Hopefully, you come back sort of washed in the river, and
Mm-hmm. A bit different.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does. Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
So for people who want to find out
Mm.
more about you and your work, or pick up a copy of Sacred Animals, where's the best places for them to do so?
If I'm being utterly mercenary, I say from me, because I get more money that way. So Sacred Animals is available from most online booksellers, without naming any in particular. And if you're in the UK, then probably the easiest thing to do, if you don't want to do an online sale, is you can get it from me, and again we'll put my contact in the in the information below. You could go to Green Magic Publishing, who are the publishers, and they sell direct as well. But a local bookshop could order it if they haven't got it. If they haven't got it already, that's outrageous, and you should go and complain, and quite possibly, sort of have a demonstration outside with extra hedgehogs and occasional badgers and things.
I'd flip a table.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I'm not going to say lob interesting effluent at walls or anything, but yeah, you can get it from bookshops. Or a bookshop can order it easily. You can get it online. If you're not a UK-based viewer of this podcast, it is available from, again, online book services, and there are distributors for Green Magic Publishing, certainly in the States, and I think in Australia. So in those countries, again, it should be easily ordered through a bookshop. So that's Sacred Animals, and I will now hold up a copy. This is Sacred Animals. You can get your own copy. But for my other work, the best thing to do is just to follow me. I am on assorted social media, which I even update when I have got my phone switched on. And for that, just look up Creeping Toad, and that will generally take you to me. I have a website which doesn't update as often as it should, and I have a blog which I post on fairly regularly, and a lot of my poetry turns up on blogs and things like that as well.
Lovely stuff. Well, thank you, Gordon. I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure. And you're welcome back on the Spirit Box anytime you'd like to.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely meeting you, and I hope people have enjoyed our little conversation and find it useful and not too confusing. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Right, you're welcome.
Thank you, Gordon. I hope you all enjoyed that. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to Gordon's work elsewhere. I'm Dara Mason, and you've been listening to The Spirit Box. Thank you, and goodbye.